Hey, what's up, Geekscape? Let me do that again. Hey, what's up, Geekscapists? We've got Iké Boys director Eric McEver coming up on the show. We're going to be talking Farscape, obviously, because it's what we named Geekscape after. We're going to be talking about his brand new indie movie, Iké Boys, and all of the amazing references and influences that make up the movie. Everything from Sentai shows to kaiju movies to a ton more. I mean, there's actually a movie that I was thinking of watching this film that it inspired me, that I was like, oh, this had to be inspired by this kind of genre. And it's not necessarily something, I'm trying to recall it. It's not necessarily something that was in the movie. I'm just like, I'm getting a little bit of sense of this. It's an interesting movie. It has a ton of charm. I can't wait for the Geekscapists to discover it. But you know what? Let's just throw you an episode and then we can get down to it. All right. This is Geekscape. Enjoy. Hey, what's up, Geekscapists? I'm Jonathan, and it's time to start the show. I've been doing those little pre-rolls before the show, last 2 or 3 episodes. Let me know if they're working for you. I just like the sense that when somebody downloads the show, they get a little sense of like, wait, what is this show about? And they hear that before they just get thrown into that theme song. But you know what? The theme song does say we're going to be doing a little bit of movies, video games, and comics, and TV, and all that stuff. So if you're not into that stuff, just turn it off now, because this has been the pop culture podcast we've been giving you almost every week for like 15 years. So this is Geekscape. I'm your host. Hi, how you doing? If you look up one day and I'm not hosting the show, it's because Matt Kelly has successfully taken over Geekscape completely, and I'm either dead somewhere or almost dead somewhere, so call the police. That being said, we have a pretty damn good episode coming up for y'all. My good buddy Eric McEver is on the show. He's got this movie, Iké Boys. We got to talk about distribution. I watched the movie. It just premiered at Fantastic Fest back in Austin. I say back in Austin because it's my hometown. I can say back in Austin because I spent half my life there. I'm sure the crowd loved it because I loved this movie. This is a movie I want the Geekscapists to know. I want the Geekscapists to champion it. I want this to be your movie. I loved it. It is so freaking charming. And I've got the director and co-writer here to talk to me about it. He did an interview on the Horror Movie Night feed with Matt, who did some coverage on Fantastic Fest. There's a short interview with he and the cast up on that feed right now, if y'all are Horror Movie Night subscribers. But I got Eric for an hour, so we're going to use it with no delay right here, Geekscapists. There's Eric, director of Iké Boys, which I freaking love, dude. I love this movie.
Thank you so much. Well, that means the world to me. It's going to sound corny, but I really have poured my heart and soul into this thing. And I'm just, I'm really delighted that my heart and soul seems to be resonating with other people's hearts and souls, because that was, they say specificity is universal. And my cherished ambition for this film is that it is a film that people will turn to when they've had an awful day and they need to pick me up. And I thought, okay, well, if I really, and then it's like, yeah, I'm watching Iké Boys. And then an hour and a half later, you feel better about your life. And my thinking was, well, I can really only earn the right of, having an audience member trust me with their moment of vulnerability if I am vulnerable with them. And so I'm just going to be, as honest and sincere as possible about what I believe and, what I feel and what I think matters in life. So I'm really delighted that that's resonating with people.
I just love that you weren't acting cool when you made this movie. I mean, you know what I'm saying though? Like I say it, but as I'm watching this movie, it is not, you are completely unapologetic about how big of a nerd you are, which is so, I mean, that's what we celebrate here.
Yeah.
And you know, the people who fake it, right? Like, you know, I mean, let's not name names, but you know, when people give the cool reference or talk about the pop culture thing in their movie, and it just does not resonate on a sincere level. And I think as geeks, we have a barometer for that because we grew up and when we got it wrong, we got our heads dented in. Like we trusted the wrong people. And, you know, it's like the people who said they liked it, but they weren't all into it. And I'm not talking about gatekeeping here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about just a sincere love and unapologetic love for the material. Don't have to be an excellent expert on everything. You don't have to be completely all in on the smallest minutia of the property. I'm not talking about obsession. I'm just talking about love, I think.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that because that really speaks to what I was trying to do. I mean, there were a couple of moments early on in the process where I thought, okay, well, there's a couple of ways I could make this film. There's one way I could make it where it's cute, it's jokey, it's ironic, and it sort of plays into what a lot of people think that this stuff is about. Or I could do the version that I really believe in, which is the version from my heart and which is the version about the actual reality that I lived, which was really escaping into these stories as a means of coping with and better understanding life. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff in anime, in tokusatsu that objectively it's ridiculous and it's bonkers, but you don't watch it ironically. You don't watch it to make fun of it. You watch it to enter into this heightened world. And then when you engage with it on that level, it's really like, it's mythological stuff. It's about good and evil. It's about understanding the primal forces behind life. And, you know, that's what growing up is about. Like, anyone who says that childhood is this innocent, magical time is full of it. Childhood is cruel and tough and hard. And these things are ways of helping process how difficult the world is. So it was really important for me to be sincere and honest because that's what life is. And anyone who tells you otherwise is fooling themselves.
I just read the funniest conversation about how Pixar is so involved in death and the characters dying. And we see that in recent movies like Coco, but I think that stuff is absolutely present in Woody's predicament of being the forgotten toy for Andy. And somebody wrote the X in Pixar stands for existential crisis. And I was like, absolutely. And those are things that I remember watching The Explorers, Joe Dante's The Explorers as a kid and thinking, you know, these kids built this spaceship in their backyard. If y'all haven't seen The Explorers, Geekscape is, you're probably younger than the host of the Geekscape podcast, but it's fine. I'll bring you along. I just remember thinking as they make this spaceship out of I don't know, what was it, a washer dryer and all this stuff, and you get Ethan Hawke and these characters go up in the spaceship, and that's what the movie is. They meet aliens. I just kept thinking, if anything goes wrong, they can't breathe. If anything goes wrong, they're going to incident. And I just remember that little round spaceship, watching it float into space. Yeah. And my thought was, wherever they go, I hope they're okay and I hope they're safe because death is just on the other side of that dishwasher door or whatever the heck they use to build their spaceship. And I always think that's present. And I think we learned that when Artax sinks into the swamp of whatever. Matt's yelling right now. Listen to the podcast, Matt Kelly, because he's like, it's the swamp of sadness or whatever it is. But I think those things have to be present in a movie about a fantasy to understand the relatability. And there's many tools that you borrowed from the language of anime, manga, from all sorts of films. And as I'm watching them, I'm just loving the references, and I love the opening of your movie, and I love the animations of the movie. Geekscape this movie, Iké Boys, is about two kids growing up in Oklahoma. They're mad anime manga fans. It has completely isolated them from the social fabric of their high school. And one day a foreign exchange student shows up, and she's from Japan. And this is days,
which is also a big deal.
Yeah, and this is days within the turn of the century and in Y2K crisis. This takes place days before the end of the year in 1999, and I remember where I was at that moment. And what I love about it is you start with this on black, grim. We've seen this in a million movies. in whether it's anime or Japanese films, and you just hear in Japanese the story of this prophecy that come the turn of the century, these old gods are going to rise from the earth and reclaim the planet as theirs, and the only thing that they've been sealed away, but the prophecy says they may be unchained and returned. And we're like, oh, that's cool. Eric's going to deal with a metaphor for these kids to deal with, and it's going to be a John Hughes like fun movie with a little bit of Napoleon Dynamite elements to it. And we're going to see how these kids deal with this metaphor. No, Jonathan is not. This literally the old gods are going to return, and these two kids in this foreign exchange student living in Oklahoma have to deal with the freaking old gods, and there will be kaiju, and there will be freaking no, everything you thought was a fantasy precursor to set you up for the film and introduce you to the language of this film isn't just metaphor, buddy. They're gonna, by the end of this movie, you are going to see some stuff, and it's awesome. And I loved again that you didn't just tell us the metaphor of these things, you made us sit with it and then experience it, and you weren't shy with you weren't hinting at the language, you were using the language, you were celebrating the language. And Geekscape is, as I said in my intro, Iké Boys is a movie I want you to celebrate, and not just if you're an anime or manga fan. This is just a good coming of age story, which I think most of our content that we like here on the show and in this community is Spider-Man coming of age, Batman dealing with social responsibility, Superman dealing with integrating himself into a society and a cause that's not his. These are all things that we love in these stories, and your movie does it very, very well and very sincerely, my friend. Eric,
well, that means the world to me.
I was blown away, buddy.
Thank you. I thank you. It's because that is absolutely what I set out to do, and I think it. What you're saying. It speaks to the fact that I wanted to treat. I wanted to treat the sort of the kitchen table drama of the kids' lives with the same sincerity that I treated the actual literal end of the world. And, and I really think that the things that we go through as kids and the cruelties that we experience as kids, anyone who says that childhood is this innocent, magical time is full of it. It's childhood is hard. And there's you're aware of death early, and you're aware of the hard things early. And I think really who we are as children and our most pure selves, that is the key that lets us take care, it lets us tackle the big difficult things. And at the end, when they literally do battle with the old gods, not to give away anything, but
yeah, let's not spoil it. I love the surprises of this. Are they going here? Yeah, they're going there.
Yeah. But the secret is, the secret that saves the day is the really their purest, most innocent actual selves. And that was I don't think any of the elements in the film, from my perspective, it's not a jumbled mishmash of things. It's no accident that a sweet little high school movie and an apocalyptic movie are the same movie. It's because this stuff, it's two sides of the same coin. The sweet stuff and the really horrific stuff. It's the sweet stuff is what enables you to deal with the horrific stuff. And yeah, at least in my head, it's all, it's all interconnected. And I'm delighted that you seem to have the same reaction.
Well, Eric, when Katrina sent me the solicitation to have you on the show and to cover this movie, I was like, okay, let's see. Because sometimes, and I love the films that we've covered on Geekscape, but sometimes the indie budget will completely keep you from it's you'll watch the movie and be like, I see what he's going for, but the budget didn't really get him there. And honestly, you're shooting this film in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's pretty good tax incentives right now, and so you're working in this indie film in Oklahoma. But even with the tax incentives Oklahoma's got going for it, you still got to fight and scrape for everything at an indie level. I kind of know from my relationship with Brian Hamble, one of your producers, kind of the budget range of the film. And I'm like, how's he going to pull this off? If he actually wants to go all in on this old god stuff and the kaiju stuff, in the special effects stuff, how's he going to do this without seeing the seams, right? And that's really where like the shortcoming of a lot of these indie movies are. Like you see the seams.
Yeah.
There are places in the movie where you do see the seams, but what's great about it is you have taken on the language of Toho, you've taken on the language of some of these kaiju and sentai films, and the seams are what you celebrate. And it's like, no, the seams are the language, and you don't even see them by the time you get to that film, that part of the film, because you're already involved with the teen story, the John Hughes of it all. And then you get to this part and you're like, hey, not only did I get a John Hughes movie here, I got myself a fun Power Rangers, Gamera, Super Sentai. I'm going to say Dyamajin because I saw like a lot of the Dyamajin design in that stuff.
That was most definitely something discussed with my concept artist. Oh, yeah. Very much.
Does Geekscape get points in your book? Does Geekscape get points?
You've got so many points already.
I have all 3 Dyamajin movies still on VHS. And what's cool is when you put the VHS tapes together, they create the statue on the side on the spines. But I mean, I saw the Dyamajin design at the at the end of the film. You can't deny that. And I was like, oh yeah, I know you, Eric. We know each other. You, me, we same. Listen, as a director, like, what scared you, dude, about knowing that you're gonna start shooting the movie? Sure, you're doing good with like the practical aspects, the drama, the this and that. You have a background as an animator.
Yeah.
At this point where you start having people believe in you is your biggest production, you start having actors, crew members turn to you and say, how are we doing this again? What tools did you use, both like maybe practical previous tools or like just director, captain of the ship, let's go tools to convince them or let them see some of what you were going to make? Because like you're sitting there with like tape and string and bubble gum being like, no, guys, this isn't gonna work. And it's your big ending or it's your big sequence.
Sure.
And there's a lot of effects. What tools did you use?
Well, it's preparation.
Sure.
And it's a lot of communication. So I would say one thing that was really an ace in the hole early on is I connected with a wonderful concept artist in Tokyo named Sean Bricknell. And so Sean did all of the designs for the characters, and early, even at the fundraising stage, we put together a lookbook of about a dozen images that showed, basically it was the children's picture book version of the story. And I think if I showed it to you now, you'd be both surprised and delighted to see like how much of a one-to-one it is to the finished film, like down to the color choices, down to like this particular gray in the winter sky, or like the particular, like the thickness of the lightning in the Old Gods.
Sure, but you're using that process not just to create fundraising tools. You're using that process as part of your previs and some of the educational materials towards yourself for figuring out like, how do I want this? How do I want that? So,
absolutely. It's making the film before I make the film.
Sure.
So that was one thing where just on a visual level, it was saying like, this is a facsimile of what the film will become. There's there's certain kind of, I would call them spiritual tricks that I did, with the cast to like the cast and crew, just to get everyone on the same wavelength. I put together about a 90-minute playlist of music that I listened to it probably a couple hundred times over the course of production, just to keep myself tapped into emotionally what I was getting at with the film. And, I shared that with the cast and all the key crew. And it's just like the emotional journey that you go on listening to this playlist of mostly classical music.
It's really important. Yeah.
This is the experience you will have seeing the film. We talked about reference films. The Cornetto trilogy came up in conversations a lot. And, that was a real touchstone, because that's another one where the humor, the genre elements, and the real human pathos all intimately combine and feed into one another. It was like, that is what I want to achieve here. So I know that was very helpful for the cast. One thing I really tried to make sure that everyone knew what everyone else was doing. Partially just because it was fun. Like I tried to make sure the actors that I could, I'd have them come onto set when we were doing stuff with the suits, and I tried to like make sure that the suit actors saw the actual child actors so that they knew what was going on there. And really,
and those are stuntmen. Yeah,
they were wonderful stuntmen, but I wanted them to understand, no, you're playing the same characters. You're not. I don't want you just like doing cool things in these cool outfits. I want you, to embody what happens when you put these kids in these new strange bodies.
There's a level of familiarization that they need to familiarize themselves, but at the same time, they have to fall back on the gait, the mannerism, the weight that they're treating their bodies in the comfort zone.
Yeah. And
they had to observe. So they had to observe your actors for a stretch too.
They did. They did. Yeah. Well, this is where preparation was really, so my actual lead actors, they came to, they were on set a couple of weeks before filming started. So we had time to rehearse, like at the school we filmed, and I showed them the places I grew up. And what was really fun is Ronak and Quinn arrived first, so they had some time to bond together. And then I had them pick up Christina, who plays Miki, from the airport. And I just to kind of get them all in the same headspace, Christina is actually very fluent in English, but I had her to pretend to basically be Miki, like only speak a very baseline level of English. And for about the first week, that was the prank we played on everyone. And it was, of course, it was ridiculous, and I think caused some frayed nerves. But it really, of course, the really funny thing about that, besides getting everyone into character, as it were, was when you do that, it's funny how people like naturally like become more empathetic, and they're like, oh, I hope she's okay, and like, oh, we can. And so it really triggered. It triggered a sense of community and a sense of like, oh no, we really need to help one another out here.
Right.
So there's a lot of little things like that I did just to try to create a sense of, of shared purpose and shared community. But yeah, I mean, post-production was a long, complicated process. And it's interesting because words like, vision and artistry and story and craft, don't get me wrong, those are the most important things. Those are the most important things. It's not a very sexy word, but infrastructure is damn important. And we had a limited infrastructure on this. So, because for a Pixar film, there's pipelines and there's R&D and there's, division managers and all these things. And a lot of it at this budget level, what it fell down to was me having the film tattooed on my brain. So I could, of the 525 shots that required CG enhancements, how they all fit in and like what level of green went in this shot and what level of purple went in this shot. So it was a lot of communicating, and I'd be lying if I told you that it was easy, but it's my job to know exactly what the film is supposed to be in the end. So my ace in the hole is that I spent so much time beforehand preparing it and thinking about it and writing up what it would be, so that when the time came to operate with all these people, I could tell each group of people what they would be doing. But also I tried as much as I could, and I really wish I could have done even more of this to and this is tough because like the animation teams, like one was in France, one was in Taiwan.
Wow. And you have full-fledged anime sequences going on in this thing, and I think it's awesome. My buddy Adam Mortimer just did this movie. We had it on Geekscape for Joe Manganiello was in this, and he has animated sequences showing the beginning and the end. And they feel like I love Adam. I think the movie's really good. But some of it feels like animatic more than animation. Yeah. And at every point I was like, Eric's got this plate spinning, and it's a really tough plate to keep spinning all this stuff. This stuff's going to fall into animatics pretty soon. You know when a movie does that, right? Like, it's just like, whether it's deadline, budget, manpower, infrastructure, like you said, like sometimes the animated sequences just turn into animatic. Yeah. And there's not the fluidity that anime is not CGI heavy traditionally. The stuff that you're drawing from the 1960s, 1970s stuff, that stuff is that stuff is Miyazaki stuff. Like that is stuff is Robotech. Like that stuff was frame by frame, cell by cell, like drawn. And I was like, at any point, Eric's got to do it. Like, come on, this is an indie movie. He's gonna fall into animatics. You didn't. You didn't. You fell into probably aging yourself by 30 years.
I threw out my back twice. Once my upper back, once my lower back. From a year of hunching over my laptop doing so. Animation did in fact age me by 30 years.
Dude, I was blown away by the fact that you didn't fall into animatics on some of those sequences and just be like, well, you'll get the story. This is what it is. I mean, no fault to any of those filmmakers. But in a movie that has to integrate animated pieces, sometimes you're like, hey, you know what? The live action is going to carry most of this. The animatics just have to carry exposition.
Yeah.
You actually made them expressive and you made them extensions of the live action. And in many ways you integrated them. Like, I have to see the sequel. Like this, I have to see this movie celebrated by you Geekscapists who are listening to this. We just started broadcasting on Twitter as well. So welcome Twitter viewers. And I need y'all to celebrate this movie so we can get Eric the sequel that I know he wrote.
There is indeed a very specific sequel idea in the works.
Yeah, I know. I could tell. And it's awesome.
It takes it in a very different, but I think it's not the direction you think it's going, but once you see it go there, it'll be like, oh, of course that's the direction it will go.
I love it. I think that the Raid 2 is like that kind of thing where like the first Raid and the Raid 2, those two movies feel like they both feel like action movies, but they're in completely different genres. They have completely different pacing, tone, and structure. That I thought it was so brave. Nothing against the what's the Keanu Reeves one, the John Wick stuff, but I love the John Wick movies. There's a level of structure, tone, and similarity between all three movies. There's just similarity between all three movies where I'm like, it's a different Looney Tunes cartoon. Like they've replaced John Wick with the railroad with the coyote, and I think you got yourself a movie. Like it feels like I mean honestly, like when I that's why I love the John Wick movies. I'm like, oh, it's the coyote, and he's just getting himself smacked around the whole movie, and he's doing some smacking.
Well,
but
it's cinematic comfort food, which is wonderful, and by the way, really hard to make.
Absolutely. I have nothing, and I loved Nobody, the one with Odin Kirk where they did it, and nothing but respect. My worry with those movies is how much do you escalate those sequences, and like at what point do you, that's what the most impressive thing is, like how do they keep this thing going? It's like watching a juggling act continue to mature. It's like, okay, what's next? He's gonna have axes, then he's gonna have flaming axes, then the axes are gonna be chainsaws. Like you're watching this thing extend. The point I'm making is I think it's also brave to say, hey, we're not going to extend this thing. We're going to change the DNA of it to something else and see if we don't shake our audience. And that's really scary. And what you're saying and proposing with this sequel is we're going to change about half the DNA. The familiarity will lead you here. And then we're going to take you to places you are not familiar with. And I think that's more exciting to you as a filmmaker, is it not?
Oh, well, it is, and I'm delighted that you you figured out exactly what I have in mind. I mean, I think the Raid 2 is an excellent example, and that if you look at Iké Boys closely, you can get the clues for where the sequel will go. But it's like there's so much in this film that hints at a wider world, and the sequel goes into that wider world. Let me put it that way.
I love that you know what, we fell into those references. I just recalled when you're saying, I think 2011, I did a brief. I think the director of the Raid movies was on this podcast remotely, briefly. I think we only had like 15, 20 minutes with him. And then Simon Pegg of the Cornetto trilogy obviously was on for a full episode and was in our film Dock of the Dead, our documentary. So you have two references that are Geekscape related. And now you're here.
Yes, I mean, well, first of all, like I said, the Cornetto trilogy was very much my Bible in terms of tone and craft and like how to make the kind of film I wanted to make. I'll say for the Raid director, I was really lucky. He did a master class at my film school at NYU, and what a sweet.
He was great,
sweet, gentle, but also like the things I was talking about earlier about knowing the entire film in advance so that I could be communicating that with everyone. Like that was like, he was definitely one of the mentors I learned that from, because
he's psycho. He shot the whole movie once on mini DV, cut it, and then shot the whole thing again. Like the raid that you watch is the second raid that he shot.
Yeah.
And when he was telling me about that, I was like, you got to be kidding me, dude. The work he went in. But you know what? You don't put that work in, people get hurt. You don't put that work in, people get, you know, you lose your days.
Yeah.
Especially with the number of shots he had to do.
Yeah.
The raid has a ton of shots. Like, you got to know exactly where you're going to put the camera on every one and what's going to be in front of it. This piece right here, you were talking earlier about, we were talking a bit about, you know, the dichotomy between the youthful innocence and a bit of the gravity of what's surrounding. And I think what you were leading to, and I'm going to go ahead and bastardize it in some version, is the idea that when things do happen, kids are resilient. And kids are resilient maybe at a level of, I don't want to say, it's going to have negative connotation. I don't really, it's like a level of naivety or freshness with the world where, it's like, okay, you get, like, as a kid, if something bad happens, it has not yet become routine to the level of defeat, and it's always going to be this way. And so a kid has a level of resilience and positivity coming out of grief or coming out of trauma. Did you experience any of that as a kid, Eric?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we all had it in some form or fashion. So I think one specific story I can tell is, you know, there's tornado imagery in this film, and actually there's a weathercaster who cameos in here. His name's Gary England, and he's an Oklahoma legend.
And stay through the credits. You'll see a little bit more legend at the end of the credits.
Yeah, boy, will you ever. And I am alive today because of Gary England. When I was 12, there were bad thunderstorms in the area, and I turned the TV, and he said there was a tornado that just touched down a few blocks from my house, and I went into the shelter beneath the closet just in time, and really just in time, and the house around me got all torn up, but I was safe in the shelter. So I nearly died, age 12, and he saved my life, and it's part of the reason why he has a cameo in the film, is because it's my long delayed payback to my gratitude towards him. But it speaks to a deeper issue of it. I realized pretty young that death was going to come for me at some point, and I don't have any, there's no guarantee of what measure of life that I have. And so I had better do things that I had better leave a meaningful life, because I don't know how long my life will be, and I'd better do the things that I think matter, and I think I am put on earth to do. I better be doing them now. I shouldn't put them off. And I realized that very young, and I think it put a kind of a preternatural awareness of my own mortality into my brain at a pretty young age. But the weird side effect of that is that I wouldn't say it like sobered me up or made me grow up, but it codified some of that like little boyishness forever. It was like, oh no, like these are the important things. So I'm not going to get sucked away by what the world tells me is actually important.
Sucked away? That's the choice word you want to use?
Well, I don't know. It's distracted, or a lot of it's like, I think
like a tornado sucking you away. Is that what you wanted to say?
Well, maybe that's a Freudian slip right there. I do believe, from personal, we come out pre-baked. We are who we are. So I'm an only child, but I went to the school we filmed at. I went to a school with the same group of about 80 classmates, from kindergarten through high school. And it's striking how like the basic personalities of everyone in that class, they did not change. And the fact that the fact that I'm on this podcast right now, I'm sure would not surprise my classmates. It's like, and each of them, like the things they've done with their lives, you could have predicted some variant of it from kindergarten. And so I think as we get older, we add on more layers and life gets more complicated, but the really fundamental truths are set from an early stage. And so I think in many ways, the secret to a good life is, I got advice from a directing mentor in Japan a number of years ago. And it's like this 80-year-old directing guru. And he said, try to stay in touch with the reason why you first wanted to do it. Like,
okay.
keep tapped into the initial thing that motivated you.
And for you, it was
with dinosaurs.
It was dinosaurs.
Yeah, no, because it's actually a straight line from dinosaurs to Godzilla to filmmaking.
Absolutely, 100%. I see that completely.
Yeah, and I don't know, like life is too short to feel shame about still being in my dinosaur phase. So,
Yes, yeah, no. Listen, yeah. I mean, you're on Geekscape. Clearly, Jonathan did not have. but that night, was that the night? The tornado night? Was that the night where you were like, okay, everything from here out is go?
I think so.
Or were there other events?
Wow, it's interesting because I think it was a series. I don't think you can boil it down to one night. That is one that's easy to. That one's easy to point to because it's so dramatic.
Sure, it can be a lightning rod of those things, but how you acted before then and after then, or a little bit of a splinter from that moment.
Yeah, well, but I would about a year after that was when I wrote my first screenplay, and and so the tornado was when I was 12. A year later, when I was 13, that was when I wrote my first screenplay, and with a moment of of grave 13-year-old solemnity, declared that I've decided that I no longer want to be a paleontologist. I'm going to be a film director.
Okay. Go ahead, and then I'll give you my thought.
And I stuck with that. Although, as I was saying a minute ago, dinosaurs haven't gone anywhere. And I stuck with it. But there are a lot of little things. I mean, so after the screenplay, 14, 15, that's when I started doing little animations.
Sure.
And I screened those at a middle school talent show. And of course, shy, awkward, gangly kid, girl, I didn't think girls liked me. And then I screened these films for a crowd, and suddenly my classmates, including the bullies, were cheering. And
it's the greatest feeling in the world. It's why we do what we do.
And it was like, oh, wow, like I can make other people happy. And so, that was a transformative moment. It was a continuation. It was a series of transformative moments.
But Eric, it's all paleontology.
Oh yeah.
Like it's what I describe screenwriting as, is like personal paleontology, because you're going to start a story and be like, oh, there's going to be Chewbacca's and the laser swords and the spaceship battles and things like that, but it's all going to come down to some kid in Bakersfield who just wants to get out of his crap town and race cars.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you watch the New Hope or Star Wars New Hope, and you can't tell me that wasn't personal paleontology of Lucas trying to dig down to the core of his wants and needs as that kid growing up in Bakersfield, wanting to get the F out of anywhere but there. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all paleontology, Eric. You've always been a paleontologist, brother. Well, this is you celebrating and pulling up. You are the old guy that you dug out of the. I mean, but you think about that. Have you thought about your film in that level of like?
So very much so, and I think this is the first time I'm going to reveal it publicly. I use music very careful. Like I curate my emotions through music, and I don't know. There's a piece of a concert suite by Aaron Copland. It's the Red Pony Suite. It's one of his lesser known works, but I listened to it the first time as a child and then again in high school. And for me anyway, it speaks to innocence and purity and sort of like the original spark in life, and then how that interacts with the world. And there's even a point in the final piece of the Red Pony where it's like, it's celebratory and then it gets really, really dark, and actually the music stops for a couple seconds, and then right after it stops, it like the strings come in, and I'm starting to get goosebumps now, but they're bright and they're pure, and they come up, and it's almost like it's like light pushing back against the darkness, and
like a spring, like it's the spring coming back.
I for years I curated very carefully when I listened to that, because it was just so beautiful and just spoke to me so much. And for Iké Boys, the film, I decided this is the film that I'm going to use the Red Pony as my reference point, because it's like it helps. It helps with the paleontology.
It's a barometer. It's like a lodestone. Like it recenters you immediately.
No, it's like it immediately bores. It cuts through all the crap and bores down to what's really at the heart of this. And so that was a constant tool in the process to not get too wrapped up in, to help me not get too wrapped up in like all of the layers of like, would this be cool? Would that be cool? Like, okay, what is the compass point? This is the compass point. And if I'm looking for an answer to a question, follow that compass point. So absolutely, I mean, and by the way, you talk about paleontology, my thesis film at film school is a love story about paleontology. Paleonaut, it's on YouTube. So
I mean, you grew up in a place, like, no offense, you grew up in a place where there ain't nothing to do but look at a bunch of dirt everywhere. So like, what am I gonna say, man? There's nothing in Oklahoma. I'm kidding. As a Texan in Austin, like being like Oklahoma, Schmoklahoma.
You are so thoroughly speaking my language. As a kid,
what are you gonna do? You're gonna dig. There's nothing around there.
As a kid, I was bored out of my skull, and I remember thinking as a child, I want to get out of Oklahoma because nothing of significance happens in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I want to go to Tokyo where actual meaningful things happen. And Tokyo is great. Tokyo, I mean, it's my second home. I love Tokyo. I love Japan. But I also discovered a lot of people there who thought that Oklahoma was this cool, exotic place.
Isn't that crazy?
You know, in retrospect, and this is a big fat thank you to my parents. But I'm so grateful that I had a boring childhood, because a boring childhood equals a childhood where your imagination wanders and you have the freedom to dream of what life might hold. It's funny. I think growing up in a place that is that seems like nowhere, where you seem like nobody, is just about the greatest gift you can give to a person if you want to motivate them to get things done.
And you had no siblings, but this film has a friendship in it, a brother-like friendship in it between these two main characters.
Yeah.
And I think in an extent, like, you did end up appreciating the friends that you had, because that was special. You didn't, I lived with two brothers, and the escapability of it was like futile. I was like, dude, that's who you're hanging out with, and you each have your own friends based on your age, but like, that is who you're hanging out with, and you are always hanging out, and you do not get that much time to yourself. So I mean, there were times when I was a kid, my dad would think that I had gotten kidnapped or been missing, but I had really just been like falling asleep in the treehouse or under the bushes by the house, because I just wanted to get to a place where I could be by myself with my thoughts. And little Jonathan wouldn't come out until he heard the fire sirens and looked up, and the firemen or paramedics or police were there because they were going to search the neighborhood for Jonathan, who had just fallen asleep with the comic book underneath underneath the house where he had gone to just be by himself, because otherwise you got these two brothers trying to beat the shit out of him the whole time. No offense.
Well, so the friendship in Iké Boys, it is very loosely based off of my relationship with my best friend in high school, and he's actually the one who I made my first feature with, a high school movie. But damn, am I proud of it as a high school movie. And our friendship was so interesting because I think we both knew it at the time, but we're still dear friends now. But we realized as the years have gone on how much of our friendship stemmed from, we were each looking to the other to fulfill a perceived inadequacy in ourselves. And as we grew over and matured, we realized, oh no, wait, like, we're actually good as we are. And like, the friendship strengthened and matured as we realized, no, like, we're both good. Like,
you're talking about like being mirrors to each other?
Yeah, I think so. Well, so I mean, the outside looking in, I mean, so I don't think I'm going to be speaking out of school when I say anything here, but like, I was intelligent but introverted and shy and awkward, and I looked to my friend because he was outgoing and cool and charismatic, and women were into him, and I was like, I want to hitch myself to someone who has all those things.
But in doing so, you would have been like a second version of that, and you
Yeah.
learned the value of being, hey, I'm over here. If you would like the other option,
Yeah.
I'm like right here.
Yes. But the immense irony of the situation was that I found out in retroactively that he admired me as the one who was sure in my own skin, didn't have anything to prove.
Didn't try that cool.
And I didn't think of myself that way, but he did.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of, what was neat and empowering about the friendship is there was a lot of insecurity built into the origin of it. But then the deeper the friendship became, that we sort of revealed those things to one another and talked each other out of our own insecurities. And then friendship really deepened because we realized, oh no, like everyone is insecure. And
we're all effed up. Yeah.
Yeah. And we can so let's just be friends because we're equals.
Isn't that the conversation that people say? Like, mainly you get that conversation when you're hanging out with people who are no good for you, but you are the average of the 5 people that you see the most. Yeah. But it's not so much like, hey, you hang out with a bunch of meth heads, they're going to teach you how to be a meth head. But it's ultimately the people you hang out with, you choose them as reflections of yourself. But what you're saying in this story, and I'm thinking about it in my own life now that we talk about it. We do talk about Geekscape here on Geekscape. It's just sometimes it's not interesting to me. I like talking about storytellers and where they come from. Sorry, we're not talking about that thing you're going to forget about 10 minutes later.
It's the tool for understanding real life. So
right.
It really is all connected.
So I think that your friends teach you how to celebrate yourself. Yeah. When you do not want to celebrate yourself. Yes. Because the last thing you want to do growing up is sometimes celebrate yourself because you've been kicked around. And like your friends are the ones who are like, hey, dude, you're the reason I hang out with you. Yeah. Even if you don't see it, I see it. And when you get into relationships later on that are romantic or partnership relationships, you have to let go of your own BS in order to allow them to show you those things too. And that is really hard because then you get into an idea where maybe you resent them for you resent yourself, but their reflection of their feelings for you creates this weird complex mistrust or resentment. If that relationship is not right, Geekscapists go to therapy. Anyway, well, we're talking about anything but geek stuff right now, but I don't know, man. Yeah, it's like, okay, we got a Sandman trailer. I like Sandman. Enjoy it. All right. But like, I don't want to spend too much of my time talking about stuff that is, you're just going to, you know what I mean? Like, I love pop culture. I do, Geekscape, and we will talk about Farscape, but like.
Well, let me interject here. That was the magic of making, the thing I miss most, not being able to get back to Japan because of COVID, is my friends there. And the thing about making friends in another culture and another language is it really intensifies that process of forcing you to get past the perceived exterior of a person and to the real reality of the person. Like the gift of being someone who, through a lot of hard work, has become very fluent in Japanese is that I've been able to engage with a wide swath of human beings in Japan, different ages, different interests. And I'm not Japanese. I never will be Japanese, but like Japanese people are able to engage with me in a way they wouldn't a Japanese person. And it's been a tool for really empathetically connecting with just other people as other people.
Because of the lack of familiarity?
Because
I mean, does that make sense? Like their view of you is, there's no representative here. He's not putting on a front. There's no representative here because he doesn't even know, he's not equipped enough socially, culturally yet to have a representative, to fall into a niche, to fall into a group.
There's some of that. Japan is such a codified, there's so many expectations put on people by Japanese society. And by the simple innate fact that I'm not a part of that society, I think on some subconscious fashion, it's easier for people to be their true selves around me. Like,
do they dismiss you from those requirements? Do they dismiss you from having to adhere to some of those constraints?
I mean, just by looking at me, like it's almost a subconscious thing. It's like I can speak the language and I understand the culture, but I look different, and I'm never going to be,
So it's like we won't expect that of him. Like, oh, he's different. We won't expect that of him.
Yeah, and I've gotten into trouble a few times by trying to be too Japanese, and I've actually had the really close friends kind of call me out on it and be like,
"Stop just doing racist. That.
Stop doing racist. That makes me very uncomfortable."
You're being very racist, Eric. You're being very racist. We just don't know any better. It's like, sorry. He's also from Oklahoma. Like, please. No, I'm kidding. There will be no. So, Eric, like, dude, Eric, the thing is, like, we could talk for. When I talked to Matt Kelly after I heard your shorter interview with the cast on Horror Movie Night, and Geekscape is seek it out too, because they do get into things like the Sentai movies or Sentai shows and things like that are a little more. I mean, this is the language that this movie, Iké Boys, that I want you all to celebrate, is about. Like, this is the language that it speaks, and I love this movie for its sincerity. But when I watch the movie, honestly, Eric, I'm watching this movie, and I'm seeing all these beautiful things that we celebrate, and all the pop culture stuff that you used to hang from the tree. But what I love the most is that there was a tree there. And it's not just ornament, or it's like not just ornament. And you see that in these pop culture movies sometimes, where it's like, you're going to put the pop culture references, and there's no tree to hang them from.
Yeah.
And so what Geekscape is, who are expecting us to talk about, kaiju or this and that, like, great. I love it. You can find that. I'm sure Eric's done a lot of those interviews, but I want to talk about the tree, and I want to talk about the filmmaking. I want to talk about those 180-degree jumps that you did. You know what I'm talking about? You did it twice in 2 scenes in a row, and I was like, why do you do that? You know what I mean? When they're first off, we got to talk about putting Ben Bowder in the movie, and how much I love that you put Ben Bowder in a movie.
I have a lot of.
We're huge Farscape fans, but that one scene where they're putting the bike in the truck, and you put your master there, and then when you go to the singles, you're on the other side of the line. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm down. Like 1 or 2 scenes later, master's on one side, other side of the line, gives the singles.
Yeah.
Like production requirement, like design, like talk to me about that. I don't want to call you out if that's like not or whatever.
Both of those scenes, honestly, it's so when you do a French over, it's because there's something in the scene that implies observation or whatever being discussed being about something else. So the scene at the truck,
we just got so in the weeds, filmmaker fans. Like, hope you came with us. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's what they signed up for, hopefully.
Welcome to Geekscape.
The scene by the truck, they're talking, the father and Miki are talking about Sean. And so so I go behind them, go into French overs because, they are talking about someone else.
Yes.
Also, I mean, the other thing is there's, if you frame it right, there's a sense of intimacy when it's done that way. And I wanted to show
like you've been pulled into that relationship.
Exactly.
Because here's the thing, the master was established on one side of the truck, and then you could just go to keep the line, go into singles on that side of the truck, but you were still on that observational side of the fourth wall. Geekscape is, if you can see that, you were still sharing it. And they did it in the last Ted Lasso episode. They were using French overs in this Ted Lasso episode for the last week, and I was like, why are they doing that? Oh, I got it. And the French overs pull you into being a participant. You are now jumping from the POV of the master, which if you're sitting in a theater would be the seats that you paid for. And now you're on stage with the participants in the singles. You don't go back to the master too much on that one, or it breaks it.
Yeah, well, it's
too flippy floppy.
Yeah, and it's fine. You certainly have emotional access there, but you don't have as much emotional access.
Sure. It's distance.
And
you did it when he comes in with hey, you guys talking about me? Like you did it in 2 or 3 scenes later. You use that French over again. Do you recall?
Well, let's see. Are we talking about the scene in the office?
Yes, sir.
We're talking about the argument with
because you love that too. I was like, I gotta ask him about these French overs because this homie's using them like 3 times, and I know he's not like 180, 180. Like, I know you know what you're doing. So like, talk to me about these French overs because I want to learn some of this stuff because that's why I love having filmmakers on the show.
What it really came down to. Thank you for the question. I mean, it really came down to it's where do we want the audience to be? And the scenes at the French overs, I want the audience to be. I want them. Whenever you're doing a French over, you are with the character you're seeing, and you're with them thinking about something else. And in both of those scenes, it's like, I want to be right there with what they're thinking, what they're worried about. and subconsciously thinking about, like, just by the nature of looking over someone's shoulders and being right there with their face, you're thinking about what is just off screen that you're not seeing.
Yes, I get the singles, but coming off of a jump,
Mhm.
and keep in mind, like, the first time I like noticed it, be like, oh, cool. Was I think Tim Burton does it in the second Batman with Selena Kyle sitting on the in front of the fire with Bruce Wayne. I think they use the French over there. The first time I saw it like 20 years ago and being like, oh, that's a cool thing. Because otherwise you're like, what the F? As a film nerd, you're like, what the F? People are like, oh, it doesn't bother me because they're not morons. Like, they're not film people like who are like looking at every little thing. Were you worried about using them 3 times? That's my question. Were you worried about using French overs 3 times in their film? And now the audience is like, what the F are they talking about? Talk about kaiju.
And the honest answer is no, I wasn't. I mean, I take so many other objectively bigger risks in this film. And
you do.
I like French overs. I like them. I think they work. And to be honest, I mean, it's funny now because I'm thinking back on the decision-making process for all of them. And
because sometimes you just get wrapped up in production. You don't even see that you did it 3 times in a row. You know what I mean? Or you don't, or maybe there's scenes that were removed, or maybe there's scenes that were reformatted, and you're like, oh crap, they ended up next to each other.
Well, it's funny because I think having this conversation with you, I'm realizing, in the middle of the film, there are 3 scenes with French overs. And the middle of the film was where, like, that's where the characters are most kind of like they're reaching their lowest state and they're like getting deeper into their inner journey. And I think that's where it came from. So I think it emerged naturally because I was thinking this is where the audience needs to be at this moment in the film. It's like, don't worry, like big bravoso stuff is right around the corner. But in order to earn that, we need to get really, really close right here.
And I think as a filmmaker, like, I think, okay, so you talk about over planning, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about plan. I think at some time you only do that stuff to like 85-90%, if that, and you just have to like let the movie find it too, and like you just got to let the story get to you and like leave enough air in there that you didn't freaking totally squeeze out every bit of I don't know, improvisation or collaboration that might come to you that might have a great idea. Like if you just overplay, I'm not telling you Geekscape is not to be disciplined, don't overplan your stuff, but leave some room for discovery, leave some room for your instinct and emotion to come over. I remember talking to Gavin O'Connor about that movie Warrior that he did. I like this movie. Like, remember this movie? It's Tom Hardy versus Joel Edgerton, and they're like estranged brothers who end up like meeting in like the title fight of a UFC. And I remember asking him, I was like, you didn't think that was like totally like a little too easy that these 2 brothers end up like in the title fight of a UFC after being estranged and like a little too coincidental or like contrived? And he goes, no, I just wrote the movie I wanted to write. Well, and I was like, snap. And sometimes you just got to do that.
So I'll tell you, I don't actually think they're contradictory. I think that preparation lets you play. Like if you're prepared, then you have the mental bandwidth to toss all of your preparation into the rubbish bin and do something way better.
Oh, when stuff goes to shit too. Like sometimes I remember having a PA who had all my greens on a truck, and greens are like your foliage. You sometimes to cover like the fact that you're shooting in Los Angeles, so you want to cover the skyline with foliage or a tree or a fake bush. And I was shooting in that direction for the sunrise exteriors. And I remember the night before, this PA with our truck with all our greens on it had hit a car and been seen and didn't want to tell anybody in the production. He was embarrassed that the car got towed, or the truck with all my greens got towed. Those greens didn't show up until noon. I'm supposed to do a sunrise shot pointed towards Los Angeles, and I have all the greens that are supposed to cover Los Angeles. They ain't showing up because truck got pulled. Nobody knew where this kid was. He was hiding. So immediately you start flipping, flopping your floor plans and shots to get other directions and stuff. I think it turned out better. I ended up shooting ninjas like jumping into trees and stuff.
Well, I have a personal mantra for filmmaking and for life, but certainly filmmaking, which is that every problem is an opportunity. And
yes, that's life. That's life, brother.
I say that because there will be problems. Filmmaking is an entropy machine. And I don't say that in this like Pollyanna-ish, oh, good things are going to happen. No, horrible, bad things are going to happen.
Yes, life sucks in a lot of ways.
So we've got a wonderful Japanese actress in the film, Yumiko Shaku. And she is a marquee name actress.
And she played Billy Zane's wife?
Yeah.
That may be one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever seen in my entire life. This
She
actress you're talking about.
That beautiful on the inside too. She is just
it's incredible
of a human being. So her visa got denied by the previous presidential administration, and the last minute scramble to appeal the application. And I mean, if you read the name of the end credits, the names in the special thanks closely, you will realize the number of outlandish favors that got called in.
Oh no.
And so, which speaks to my larger point of, we pulled it off, and it was a gigantic catastrophe. Her visa got approved the morning of her flight, which we rescheduled 3 times.
That's insane. That's really stressful.
It was, well, and you know,
you're rolling by that time. Like, she's showing up in production, right?
The first 2 weeks of the shoot, I had to practice what I try to do regularly, which is exist in a quantum state of having tremendous stress and tremendous worry,
no control.
Coexisting with, but isn't that filmmaking? It's like,
yes, that's life in filmmaking. You don't know when you're going to step off the wrong curb. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean, what an empowering experience to learn like the favors that I could call in. There's so many.
And filmmaking requires it. Filmmaking requires you to. I mean, everything requires it. Like, if you're an island in this life, and we think about that emotionally, if you're so banged up that you become an island in this life, like, it's a really hard place to. When you fall, nobody catches you, and it's hard. Like, life can be really hard, and if you don't create friendships, or you hurt friendships or ruin friendships, I've done both. Yeah. Like, when you fall, nobody catches you. I mean, I'll tell you what, I hadn't seen Brian Hamble, who worked for Best Medicine, one of your producers. Like, I hadn't seen Brian Hamble in years. I hadn't talked to him since my divorce. He was at my wedding.
Yeah.
I hadn't talked to him since my divorce. I wrote, when I heard you were coming on the show and I was working this out, like, I wrote Brian and said, hey man, your guy Eric's coming on the show. How's your company doing? How you doing? Like, we're going to meet up here in a week or so. You got to keep nurturing that garden of friendship, because I definitely felt bad sending that email. I know I'd been wrapped up in my own stuff since the divorce. You Geekscape has been witness to it, but I had to write that email and be like, hey Brian, like, man, I hope you didn't take this personal that I kind of disappeared on a lot of people, but your guy's coming on the script on the show. I'd love to get together. How can I help the movie? But
really, and I'm sure this is knowing Brian, I'm sure this is the case here. There were friendships that really matter. Years can go by in between the intervals of friendship, and it'll be like no time has passed at all. And knowing Brian, I'm absolutely sure that that's the case.
He's awesome. Yeah. Brian is awesome. Matt Kelly says, I got to go record a horror movie night on one of the worst films I've ever seen, but I wanted to say this talk has been incredible.
Oh, shucks.
Bolte says, this shot, the French over, happened in Big when Tom Hanks kisses the lady at the dance, and it marks the change when he says he wants to stay as an adult. Yeah. And Katrina Wan says, please wrap up. You only had Eric for an hour. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I talked to Eric and I love him, and now he's probably going to come back to talk Farscape because we're homies.
Just as we had that, like the comment about Big, I remembered another shot where the perspective changes that I wanted to talk about. And yes, Ben Browder is salt of the earth. He is the best thing that like you would ever want in your life. So we need to do a sequel.
Well, let's get you back on Geekscape, buddy. Let's exchange something on socials or something. I'll find you there. And we'll get you back on Geekscape. Geekscape is, where can we find the movie? Where can we follow you on social so we know when the movie's getting released? Congrats on the big Fantastic Fest premiere.
I'm on Instagram at Eric McEver. It's my name, EricMcever. And a lot of things are in the works right now. There will be more festivals, more release soon. So TBA.
Okay. Geekscape, you can follow us on all the Geekscape socials. Just search for Geekscape, you'll find us. We will clearly be championing this movie when it's available to you all for VOD or however you can watch this movie and collect the collectible action figures from the film. I just made that up. I hope you make them. Go ahead and make them, Eric, please.
I want all the merch.
Geekscape, thank you for watching. We're available on a bunch of stuff. Again, search Geekscape. You'll find us, and you'll hear us again next week. Tell your friends to subscribe and all of that. Eric, hang tight. I still got to get your audio from the otpe website. Okay? Geekscape, you're done, though. All right? Peace, everybody. See you next week.